Welcome to another edition of Searching for Sparks. I'm Tim Motzer, your host. And today we're very excited to have Brad Tolinski on, an amazing music journalist that I've been reading his stories and interviews for decades at this point. Former editor-in-chief of Guitar World magazine. He's created and written multiple books, one being a favorite of mine, Light and Shade, about Jimmy Page, and Eruption by Eddie Van Halen. And today we're here to talk about his brand new book along with Chris Gill. The book is called Blow by Blow, and it's all about legendary Jeff Beck. So won't you please welcome aboard Brad Tolinski.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Tim.
Such a pleasure. You know, I feel like I know you because I've been reading your articles and interviews for 25 years plus.
Yeah, I've been around a long time. They haven't figured out any way to get rid of me.
I don't think so. There's not many good music journalists left, is there?
There are some good writers out there. Over the past year, actually, I've been on Substack. And I write and do a lot of things up there, and I find a lot of interesting writing in that little corner of the world.
That's where it all is now, right?
Yeah, I think so. I've come to join that gang a little bit. It's better than it's really frustrating, say, having written books about Eddie Van Halen and Jimmy Page, and just seeing out on the internet how much people get wrong. It's very frustrating.
So much. I mean, it's especially in this age of AI and people searching facts with AI, right?
Yeah.
So does that affect your life in any way, shape, or form at this stage?
No, technology always changes. And AI can be good for some things. It's just I actually do legwork for my books, and that's certainly true of the new Jeff Beck book that I've written, where you have to go out and you have to have conversations with people, and you have to sort of get it out of them, not because they're being bad people or anything, but, it takes sort of that human upon human to really get a great story, I think. So, there's a lot of garbage out there. There's a lot of stuff that's no good, but AI just recycles what's already out there. It doesn't really bring anything new to the table. And I think maybe that's my Chris Gill's great strength.
Yes.
And certainly in this Jeff Beck book, it was 3 years of very, very hard work of straightening out all these stories and deep fact checking and getting people on the phone and, getting real human stories. I remember at one point, there was one fact that I just couldn't figure out about Jeff's recording deal with Epic Records. And I realized that Clive Davis, the great Clive Davis, who died recently, had signed Jeff. And so, it took me 3 months, but I got Clive on the phone to sort of give me the real story. So I just can't get too threatened by AI. If the people watching this really want to hear the truth or hear interesting stories told by real people, then, you got to come to one of us.
Absolutely. And I love hearing that. And, I was going to ask that question anyway about, you've done many, many books, but in this book in particular, what was your process of putting it all together? How did it start? And you mentioned interviews, and how many interviews did you actually do just for this book?
Listen, Jeff Beck is one of the great artists of the 20th century. I mean, he's right up there with guys like Miles Davis and Thelonious Monk and
sure.
Itzhak Perlman or whoever you can think of in whatever genre that you want.
Yeah.
But his career is very long and complicated and goes through many transformations. Many I didn't really understand, to be honest with you. And so I was really looking for an excuse to spend the time to try to figure it all out,
I love that.
And it took us to all sorts of really interesting places, talked to many people. I'm not sure how many numbers, but for example, most people don't know that Jeff actually recorded an entire record at Motown in Detroit. It never came out.
Amazing story.
You never heard it. But I actually ended up speaking to some engineers that worked on those sessions,
Wow.
And that's the only place you're going to get that, you're going to get that story is directly from the horse's mouth, not something that's sort of floating around on the internet.
Yeah, I read your manuscript, and, it was, for me, I love Jeff, and I've loved Jeff all the way back when, I was 11 or something and got into Truth, and I didn't know the Yardbirds. I got in via Truth. And the thing about the book that I found really amazing was how deep you got into the Yardbirds. And there were many stories there that I had no idea about. And one of the things that you said, which I tend to agree with, is they were maybe the first psychedelic band. Because of what Jeff was doing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when we think about songs with fuzz guitar, you tend to think of Satisfaction by the Stones, or you think of Purple Haze by Jimi Hendrix, something like that.
Yeah.
The Yardbirds were there before Satisfaction.
Yeah.
Jeff was using fuzz, the sound of fuzz, and 2 years before Jimi Hendrix came around. Jimmy was largely influenced by Jeff. Stuff like Heart Full of Soul and Shapes of Things had a tremendous impact on Jimmy.
No doubt. I mean, I've read a lot about Jimmy too, and love Jimmy. And I just remember reading about stuff, how he couldn't wait to get to England and meet Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck and all those people he loves. So yeah, I could see that.
Well, I've had to spend a lot of time thinking about this because I wanted to, when I talk to, press or people like you about the book, like I often get the question, how do you sum up Jeff Beck?
You can't.
And, it took me 400 pages to sort of wrap my arms around that. But for those of you, for the people out there that may not quite understand where his place is. Yeah. I sort of came up with this handy dandy way of explaining it. And I say that, Jeff was, he was often grouped with Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page as the big three that all came out of England at the same time. But they were all really quite different,
Absolutely.
Eric was sort of an ambassador of the blues, and later became a significant pop star. And Page was sort of the ultimate hard rock, icon. Where I always saw Jeff as he was the adventurous free spirit. The way I put him was he was ahead of the R&D department.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was out there 2 years before anybody else doing all these things, and all these guys just copied him basically.
Yeah. Jeff was amazing, and I got to see him play live. I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 times over the years. Maybe the first time I saw him might have been with Terry Bozzio and Tony Hymas opening for Santana, and I didn't want that set to end. Actually, it was so killing. Yeah. And that blew my mind. And then I saw his bands, with Jennifer playing, and then later on with Vinny and Rhonda, those bands, which were just crushing. And it just seemed like he had such an amazing period around then. He was just out and touring, where it was really difficult to see him play live in the early days for me. He didn't get around here as much, and maybe in the 70s and the 80s. Yeah.
Well, he didn't, it was almost a shift in management helped get him back out on the road. He didn't tour as much as some of the other guys did. In fact, there's a story in the book that talks about everybody always equates Peter Grant with managing Led Zeppelin. He's sort of the famous tough guy rock manager. And what people don't know is he was actually managing Jeff for 2 years before he managed Led Zeppelin. And the difference was Page and Zeppelin they were just ready, willing to go out on the road, work day and night. And Jeff wasn't into that. So Grant ended up sort of pushing his alliances over to Zeppelin. And,
I was always curious about that area. It's like Mickey Most and Grant, and the fact that Truth came out, and then Jeff was really surprised when Jimmy Page had done some of the same material on the first Zeppelin album. And you kind of see like the template was already there with Rod Stewart, with Truth. And it's pretty interesting to see some of your detective work, to see how that all transpired.
That was a lot of detective work.
Yeah.
Like I said, some of my motivation to writing the book was because looking at Jeff's career from a distance, I couldn't figure out how he got from here to here to here to here. And I knew that there must be a story behind it. And the more I was peeling back the layers, I was like, oh, it all makes sense to me now.
Yeah.
And hopefully to, anybody that is a Jeff Beck fan, that's one of the major things that they're going to get out of the book, is to understand why Jeff did the things that he ended up doing. Now, most people sort of say he was, self-destructive in the terms of his career because of the weird changes that he made. But they were almost all done out of, artistic decisions.
Yeah.
And that again is sort of what made him interesting and different and sort of always fascinating to other guitar players. They're like, what is this guy going to do next? And he did a lot of different things. He started garage rock and psychedelia in the 60s. You could say he created heavy metal in the 70s.
Sure.
Showed the way to progressive rock and fusion, in the 70s and 80s, and just kept on improving and getting better as a player. It's an extraordinary story.
I've been playing guitar since I was 11, and those records were always on my turntable. And I remember getting the early Jeff Beck Group albums, which are the more Motown influenced records. And maybe those records came out after he played at Motown and that session didn't go too well. I think that's the lineage of that. But I remember playing those records at the house and going like, oh, what is this? And it just turned me on to like, coming from Truth, going into these more R&B flavored. And I thought those records were amazing with Max Middleton on keyboards and what happened at that era. And he was totally exploring, following his heart, I would say, right?
How do you get from Truth and Beckola, which were proto heavy metal records, to the first Jeff Beck Group records, Rough and Ready, and then the Orange record?
Yeah.
Because really it's two completely different things. Yeah. So what happened in that between time? And, I talk about the record. It's part tragedy and part inspiration that got him there. He got into a horrific car accident that sidelined him during the early 60s when all of his other friends were turning into superstars. And it was during that period that he completely rethought what he was doing. He saw all of these bands sort of following his lead on the heavier records and said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be just another heavy blues rocker, like Deep Purple or something like that.
Yeah.
I want to keep doing my own thing. But also the car accident had hurt his head.
Oh, right.
Gashed his head open. And he was also saying, I don't know if I can even do that because that sort of loud, high volume rock music. It just hurts my head.
Wow.
And it was during that time he really, really went through a serious Motown phase, Sly and the Family Stone, and decided, forget that heavy blues thing. I want to be in a funk band.
Absolutely.
I want to do heavy duty R&B. And one thing I would say he does not get credit for is the first edition of the Jeff Beck group, or the second edition of the Jeff Beck group, I should say, was one of rock's first racially integrated bands.
At the time, I think that's right.
Yeah. I mean, Sly and the Family Stone was integrated, but for a rock musician, as much as they talked about how much they liked black music, Jeff was sort of like the guy that put his money where his mouth was. And he had the great Clive Shaman play bass.
Absolutely.
And Bobby Tench on lead vocals. And that was a very progressive thing to do at the time.
Really was. And, he's always groundbreaking. He was always ahead of the curve, and I think probably in that same period, or maybe a little bit later after the second, the Orange album, I guess you would call it. He met up with Stevie Wonder somewhere along there, right?
Yeah. Well, it's a complicated story that's been told in a zillion different ways about how Stevie Wonder had written Superstition for Jeff.
Right.
And Jeff releasing it after him, unfortunately. And it's such a complicated story. My joke with my co-author, Chris Gill, was I could have actually written a whole book just about that, that episode. Something for Substack, maybe. Yeah, well, not even. I mean, it would be 6 Substacks. Oh, okay. But I'll give you the short version, and then if your listeners are intrigued, they can go and read the long version in the book. Absolutely. But anyways, Jeff was going through this period where he was moving away from heavy metal into R&B and funk music. And he just had fallen in love with the music of Stevie Wonder. And the idea was he wanted Stevie to produce the Orange record, the second. Oh, wow. And so he meets Stevie backstage in Detroit at a show and says, sort of makes the pitch. And everybody loved the idea. Motown loved the idea. And Epic Records loved it because it would cross Jeff over to the black audience, and it would help Stevie cross over to the white audience, which he was interested at the time. But Stevie was just, I'm sorry, Jeff, I'd love to do it. I just don't have the time. I'm too busy on my own career to produce your record. Yeah. But if you play on my record, you play on a couple of songs for me, I'll write you a song or two. And he creates, so Stevie gives Jeff a tape of a dozen songs, and Jeff doesn't really like any of them. And he says, I just want you to give me something really super funky. And Stevie's like, okay. Well, you had a hit with the song called Ain't Superstitious. Why don't we do a song called Superstition? Give me some superstitions that you Brits have, so Jeff rattles off a few. And Stevie sort of goes off and just cranks out this song in like an hour or two while they're off having tea or whatever they're doing, And initially it was supposed to go to Jeff, but in typical Jeff fashion, and again, the story's a lot longer than this, his band falls apart. Just as he gets this fantastic song that was going to be a huge hit record for him, his band falls apart. And in the meantime, Stevie just takes Superstition and records it for his next record, and they make it into a single, and of course it explodes, and Jeff sort of misses his opportunity. He ends up recording it anyway, but it was a little too late by that time. Yeah, and that version, Beck, Bogart, and Appice,
is almost heavy metal in a way. It's funk metal in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, but that's how you get from the hard rock, hard metal of the first Jeff Beck group to the funky version of the second Jeff Beck group. And then, of course, those records only do okay. So Jeff says, I'll try to get heavy again. Maybe I can jump in on this heavy metal thing because it seems to be selling. And that's when he creates Beck, Bogart, and Appice, which lasts for just a record. And my God, that was a real soap opera as well in the book.
Yes, I learned a lot about that moment in time, and there it just seemed like you filled in so many holes and gaps for me in the reading of Jeff's story, and there was always the trying to figure out the next person or the critical band or the next thing, and then miraculously we fall into Miles Davis and Blow by Blow, and that whole fusion world comes to his lap. And looking back at his previous two albums, Rough and Ready and the Orange album, it makes sense to me that he would move into that.
Well, what makes it a little complicated is if you would have put Rough and Ready in the Orange record and then Blow by Blow, it's sort of a logical progression.
Yeah.
Because Blow by Blow, as much as people say it's jazz fusion, it's really a funk record.
Yeah, it's funk.
Get down to it.
Jazz, Stevie Wonder.
Yeah. But there's the Beck, Bogart, and Appice record in the middle of all of it.
I know, which makes no sense.
which gets a little confusing. But in the book, we do explain that Carmen, Carmen Appice, who plays in Beck, Bogart, and Appice, was also was a jazz rock fanatic. He had loved Mahavishnu Orchestra with John McLaughlin and Miles Davis and some of these other records that were coming out at the time. So while they were playing this heavy rock, Jeff and Carmen were sort of off to the side playing this more funky jazz thing. And then when the band split apart, Jeff just said, forget it. I'm done with all these stupid rock bands. I'm done with all these stupid singers. You guys are all driving me nuts. And he gets the great George Martin, who produced the Beatles, to help him create probably the definitive instrumental record of the 70s.
Yeah, I mean, George also did those Mahavishnu records,
yes, he did,
which are brilliant. And I'm trying to remember on Blow by Blow who the engineer was. That's a question. I'll look that up later.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should know that, and I don't. I flunked. It wasn't Jeff Emmerich.
It was not Jeff Emmerich. That's who I was looking for. But that's an amazing sounding record, and George's orchestrations on that album are also amazing, like in Diamond Dust and stuff like that.
Yeah. The thing that plagues Jeff throughout his entire career, and this is a mystery I really was not able to solve in this book, but it is interesting, is that as great of a player as he was and how he would craft these great guitar solos, he was totally insecure about writing his own music,
right?
About writing songs. And so that was one of the things that plagued him throughout his entire career. He was always in search of material, stuff to play, stuff that he liked. And he had a really difficult time with that.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the great thing about working with George Martin. George helped take ideas and fragments, and because he was a master of the craft of writing songs, could help Jeff realize his vision that way as well.
Yeah, and he had two Stevie Wonder songs on there.
Yeah.
I think there was a Max Middleton tune on there. And yeah, I did get that from your book, that he was always in search of the tune, that he could play. And, even going into Wired, the next album, it was a similar situation. And Jan Hammer got aboard on that one,
and
as well as Narda.
Michael Walden, who filled in a great deal on those, one of the great interviews in the book as well, helped us figure out what was going on during that period, as well as John McLaughlin too,
Tell me some of Narda's stories that you talked to him about during that time, Wired.
Well, Narda was just a kid. He had just joined the Mahavishnu Orchestra just the year or two before. He was in his early 20s.
Wow.
But Narda was always super ambitious, incredible drummer, became a great producer, produced, people like Whitney Houston.
Of course.
But Narda could also write songs. And since he was a kid and he was ambitious, he heard, this guy wants some songs. I'll go off and write some material for Jeff. And, came up with, several ideas that ended up going on Wired. And so Narda talked about what a sort of incredible opportunity that was for him. I mean, playing with John McLaughlin and these other jazz legends were super important to him as a player, but it's sort of Jeff that helped broaden and widen his career, get him to be known as a songwriter, as a producer, as a contributor, as a musician, not just a drummer.
Yeah, Narda's had an astounding career, and later on, many years later, he joined Jeff for some live shows, and which was great to see. I feel like the later years with Jeff were some of his peak guitar playing years as a performer, as a guitarist, especially in the live realm. I'm speaking of. He was always great, but it seemed like Jeff just kept getting better and better and better and better.
Yeah. I was trying to find something that sort of summed up Jeff's attitude and what made him so great. And one quote that I found, which was sort of funny, was him saying, I don't care about the rules. In fact, if I don't break rules at least 10 times in every song, I'm not doing my job properly.
Yeah.
So, so he goes into playing every song as if he's going to, push, the boundaries in some way, shape, or form. And that's really quite different than his contemporaries.
That's right.
And I don't really want to knock Clapton because, oh my God, Eric has left behind an incredible body of work, as Jimmy Page.
Absolutely.
But those guys, they hit their peak, at least in terms of guitar players, very early on.
I think that's right. Mm-hmm.
And because, I don't know, maybe they wanted to be, rock stars as much as they wanted to be, or maybe they wanted to be rich as much as they wanted. But Jeff, who would always bitch a little bit about like not having the money that those guys had, he just always wanted to push himself. And, rock and roll doesn't always reward guys that are innovators. It doesn't reward people who are ahead of their time.
Hardly ever.
Yeah. But Jeff was always sort of ahead of his time. In fact, you talk about, we could spend an hour talking about the evolution of his guitar playing.
No doubt.
Yeah. But towards the end, I've made this comparison. He was playing the guitar. He was approaching it the same way a classical musician would approach their instrument. He didn't sound like a classical musician. But I also play violin, so I sort of know about this.
Wow.
When you're playing a piece of classical music, you're thinking about every note. You're thinking about how to shape it, how to phrase it. What are the dynamics going to be? And most guitar players, I'm sure you people out there know a few, will just pick up a guitar and go, you know, they have their licks, you know, that they play. But Jeff would always, you know, he wasn't approaching it from that way. He was thinking how every note matters. How do I shape it, whether it's through a volume knob or whammy bar, moving his fingers on the strings. There's a story that we tell in the book. The great drummer Simon Phillips was working with Jeff on a song. And Jeff was getting really frustrated and said, guys, just give me a half hour and I'll be back and then we'll nail this. And so Jeff goes into the other room and he's playing it, and Simon's listening to him. And Jeff's just playing 3 notes. And he's just playing these 3 notes over and over again, just with different emphasis, different, you know, vibrato, different sound. And then he comes out and he says, okay, I'm ready to go. You know, and Simon's like, well, you were just in there playing 3 notes. And Jeff's like, yeah, but they were all important. You know, I needed to get this right, you know.
Wow. That's very inspiring, you know. Yeah. And it reminds us how important each note is. It's just like speaking or singing or whatever. It's like every single note does count. And, you know, that was the thing for me, you know, listening, and I'm sure for you too, listening to Jeff Beck throughout all these years. It's like you never knew what he was going to do. And that's what made it really exciting to see him live. You know?
It made it exciting for us, but it gave all of his record people heart attacks. Like, oh my God, what are these guys? What is this guy?
Where's he going next?
Yeah, you know,
what's the new album going to be?
This is sort of fast, and you know, I'd almost forgotten about this. But when Clive Davis died, the great record man, recently, you know, Clive was famous for working with a lot of people.
Yeah.
And his work with Jeff has been sort of overlooked. But what Clive did was he signed Jeff to a 10-record deal over at Epic Records and gave him complete artistic control to do whatever the fuck he wanted to do.
That I didn't know, and that was amazing to read that.
And I go, you know, I spoke to Clive, you know, and I said, what on earth, you know, were you thinking when you did that? That's a really unusual record deal. And Clive was just saying, well, there's only one person that can make a guitar sound like that, you know, and I'm going to tell him how to do it. You know, that's beyond me. I mean, they had such a belief in what he did. And I think that they were thinking about Jeff more like a jazz musician.
Yeah.
Than a rock musician. And, you know, it's like, you're not really going to tell Miles Davis how to play the trumpet or John Coltrane how to play the saxophone, you know, and that is how Clive regarded Jeff. And
what album did that deal begin with? Do you know?
It began with the first with the Rough and Ready.
Rough and Ready. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Good job, Clive.
Good job, Clive.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, as Jeff kept going on, you know, he would take breaks. He would cancel tours. As I was reading, there were many zigzags along the way after, I guess we call the funk fusion period. And it was very interesting to me to find out that he was looking at many different avenues at one point to get into, but then he got into electronica. And I remember when that happened because, you know, it was kind of blown up in England at the time, and all the DJ material that was happening over here in the States, it became like a big sound. And suddenly there's Jeff once again. Let's try some of this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, that's a pattern that goes all the way back to, you know, when he was playing in the Yardbirds. You know, yeah. He always wanted to find out what the next thing was. you know, but at the same time, he did have a deep appreciation from where he came from. And that really made for total chaos later on in his career, because he dives in, he does like 3 hardcore electronica records, and then afterwards he turns around and does like the most retro rockabilly record.
Yeah.
You know, and at that point, if you were a Jeff Beck fan, you were just holding on for dear life. Like, where is this guy going to go after that? You know?
Yeah, I read it as he was enjoying, you know, that inspiration in his life. You know, kind of giving a tribute to it and playing it. And the same with maybe was that the same period with Brian Wilson when he toured with Brian?
Yeah, that was a little after, but. I mean, we sort of laugh about all of his left turns and his zigzags and everything. But at the same time, you know, you have to look at it. Well, there's a couple things. One is, you know, as an artist, he would get sick of what he was doing. He would get sick of himself. He would run out of gas. He would just be like, I can't, I'm not playing anything new.
Yeah.
Run out of steam on this. I have to push myself in a different direction so I can reinvent, so I can reclaim my creativity.
Yeah.
And, you know, you have to think of these things as sort of palate cleansers.
Yeah, sure.
But, you know, I think another useful way to look at it, look at his career in a funny way too, is that, see, we're so used to the idea of the rock band of being a gang, you know, like, you know, Rolling Stones, you know, you have to have Mick and Keith and you know, or the Who, you know, you think of it as the Four-Headed Monsters or the Beatles or, you know, all of these bands that we all love. And we're bummed out or we're disturbed when they break up because, you know, we like our musicians to be part of a gang. But Jeff really approached music more like, I think of like a jazz musician or like Neil Young in a kind of way. I see a lot of parallels between him and Neil, is that he'd get a certain kind of creative inspiration and say, well, I can't have the same guys playing this that played on my other record.
Yeah, got changed it up.
So he would build bands around wherever he was heading with the guitar. And when you look at it through that lens, that's not such an odd idea.
Not at all.
It's no fun for the guys in the band that get kicked to the curb.
Yeah.
And we heard from a few of those, you know, but Jeff was, again, a genuine artist and, you know, had to find the right people to make the right sounds.
Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of highlights in his catalog. What are a few of your favorite albums? Maybe 2 or 3.
Oh my God! You know, the
hard.
Wonderful thing about being doing a book like this or being a rock writer is I got paid for 3 years to listen to Jeff Beck play the guitar. I'm not saying that to make your listeners jealous, but that was a thrill for me.
Yeah.
As an excuse to go back and really sort of dig into these records and, you know, hear them with new ears. And to be honest with you, man, Truth, the record that he did with, you know, Rod Stewart and Ron Wood playing bass of the Rolling Stones. I had never really studied it like the way I did when I was doing this, book, hearing all the different levels and hearing all the different innovations in playing, like how he used slide guitar, how he used the whammy bar, how he mixed all these different elements together. And he recorded the record in something like, it was recorded and mixed in like a week.
Yeah.
You know, which is even more astonishing. But oh my God, songs like Plinth, I mean, they're just from outer space. Like, you know, Jimi Hendrix gets a lot of credit for being an innovator, but Beck Ola, I'm really encouraging anybody out there who loves crazy guitar, you know, to dig into it. And then I always say, and this is a cliche, I don't care, but Going Down is one of the most miraculous guitar solos. And again, in the sort of perverse kind of way that Jeff approached things, it's considered a blues standard. There's not one blues lick that he's playing. It sounds like something pulled out of a Looney Tunes cartoon to me. And if you can't hear what Eddie Van Halen would be doing just a few years later in some of that stuff, then you aren't listening.
Oh, yeah. 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 I mean, you know, it's like getting ready for this interview with you. I was going back and just dropping in on Yardbirds, dropping in on Truth, dropping in on Ice Cream Cakes, his guitar sound on that. Definitely Maybe, listening to that again. You know, of course, Blow by Blow is just a standout, Wired, There and Back. And then some of the electronica stuff. And Guitar Shop.
Great record.
Really stood out hearing it again recently. You know how records go. You don't hear them for a while, and then you put it on. It's like, wow.
So, you know, the thing with that record is, of course, it's got one of his great masterpieces on it, Where Were You?
Yeah.
Which is still probably the definitive piece in terms of playing a ballad on an electric guitar and using the whammy bar. I would say the only problem with that record is it suffers a little from the 80s drum sound.
It does.
A little bit, you know. Yeah. It's too bad, but
the material's fantastic though. And you know, that song you're talking about also, he was using artificial harmonics a lot to give it almost like that vocal quality.
Yeah.
Which, you know, when we all heard him do that for the first time, and then following that with many other types of tunes along that line, it was like Jeff's looking for the melody. He's looking for the most beautiful melodies and challenging melodies. And, you know, his last touring bands, you know, I was just always loving hearing what he would do melodically. And he would always choose like the most profound melodies, whether it was a Beach Boys tune or a Beatles tune or some of his own tunes, or Cause We've Ended as Lovers, which everyone knows, but amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Jeff was ever interested in being the fastest guitarist. I mean, because, you know, he could play fast, obviously, if he wanted to. It's really all about self-expression.
Yeah.
And he wanted the guitar, like it's often said that he wanted it to sound more like a human voice. But I always say he wanted it not only be able to sound like a human voice, but maybe also something beyond that in terms of expression. And again, it gets back to that thing is towards the end of his career, when you hear his interpretations of these Day in a Life or Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
Yeah. Wow.
He is really thinking not like what can, you know, how can I just use this container to show off a bunch of flashy licks? He's really using it as a vehicle to say, how deep, you know, how deep can I go from point of expression for each and every note to have import and have impact?
Have you seen the video of him playing with Pete Townsend doing Love Reign Over Me?
No, I have not seen that.
It's out there on the internet, on YouTube somewhere, but he was sitting, both of them are sitting side by side on chairs, and they're playing like, I don't know where they even are, Royal Albert Hall or somewhere. And he's playing the melody of that with Pete playing the chords. And it's the same thing. It's like this most beautiful melody brought forth by Jeff's expression of it. And it was like, wow. So you got to check that out for sure.
I spoke to one of the guys that was Jeff Beck did a tour with the great Brian Wilson together. And I spoke with one of the musicians that was in Brian's band who was on that tour. And he was saying, he was saying that, Jeff would have this thing where he would say, "Oh, I don't really practice. I don't really play that much. Like I'll have a guitar laying against the wall or something. I'll pick it up." You want to talk about a bunch of BS, The guy said he basically never saw Jeff without a guitar in his hand and was always working on something new. And whenever he would do his sound check, this is perhaps the highest compliment you can get from another band that you're playing with. He said literally everybody would just stop and watch his sound check.
Of course.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
They all wanted to learn.
I wish I could have heard some of his sound checks.
Yeah.
How many times did you interview Jeff over the years?
I interviewed him several times.
Yeah.
And he was great. He was a lot of fun. He could be a little frustrating because, he comes from this old school of rock star, where you never let anybody see you sweat or let them think that you're working at anything, So I would ask some stupid, nerdy guitar question, and he would come up with some joke and completely distract me from what I was asking him. And I'd go back to my interview later and go, he didn't answer that. He sidestepped it by goofing on me. But one of the more memorable interviews that I did with him was with both him and Jimmy Page. And they talked together they knew each other as kids. They both learned how to play the guitar together. But the funny thing is, afterwards we did a photo shoot and Jeff had a Strat with him and Jimmy had the Les Paul with him. And Jeff just started playing all this stuff, this crazy, like rockabilly stuff on steroids. I mean, he is just chewing it up, right? Not plugged in, just a Strat. And he looks at Jimmy and he goes, "Oh, what you got for me?" And Jimmy just held up his hands like this. Like, I give.
Wow. Was that a cover story for Guitar World at the time?
Yeah, it was.
Wow.
And then, I spoke with Jeff a few times on his own, but it was always great. I also spoke with him and Billy Gibbons together too.
Oh, cool.
And it was sort of good to have other musicians there because they would keep him honest. He couldn't quite get away with, ducking questions when there was somebody else keeping him in check.
This book comes out pretty soon, right?
Comes out next week, July 14.
July 14th.
You can, order in advance now at any of your, online or any of your major bookstores. I'm doing a couple of cool things. I don't know where your podcast is going to be showing, but I'm going to be doing a book release party in New York City.
Oh, cool.
On July 14.
Okay.
Which is Thursday. And we're going to have an unbelievable band play Jeff's music all night. 2 guitar players that both play like his thing, but from different eras almost. And then I'm going to be in LA in West Hollywood to do something at Book Soup on Sunset the following Thursday, July 25th.
And July 14th in New York. And where was that?
That was at the Cutting Room.
Oh,
great a club place. Called the Cutting Room. Yeah. I
will try to make that. I'd really love to come the 14th, if possible, to New York City. So we have those 2 events coming up. And, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about yourself and journalism in general.
Sure.
And one of the things growing up as a guitar player since I was 11, reading interviews versus prose, I guess, is I really learned so much from just reading the question and the answer. And I interviewed Steven Rosen recently about his Eddie Van Halen book. And, he had that same approach. I read both of you guys for years and years and years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I got so much insight from those kinds of interviews with whether it was Jimmy Page or whoever it might have been. And this book here, I think, is a real masterpiece, for guitar players and recording engineers and songwriters to the kinds of questions that you asked Jimmy over the years and gleaned out of him, whether he wanted to answer them or not, I don't know. But I think that's a fabulous book, and I wanted to congratulate you on that. But talk a little bit about doing the raw interview versus the deeper journalistic writing.
Right. Well, it's interesting because we've been asked a bit. My co-author Chris Gill and I have been asked a bit about that. Was that I did the book that you're talking about, Light and Shade Conversations with Jimmy Page, and then the follow-up book, Eruption Conversations with Eddie Van Halen.
Yeah.
Now, those interviews were conducted over a period of 20, over 2 decades.
Yeah.
And I just felt in the case of Jimmy and Ed, we had such an incredible treasure trove of information by these two guys. And I don't want to overstate this, but again, like Jeff Beck, if you want to pick 3 guitar players who really made a huge impact on the 20th century and continue to the 21st century, it's really those guys. And I thought, Jimmy is so articulate. And, my interviews with Jimmy would go something like this. I would interview him for, it might be like 2 or 3 hours.
Wow.
And then, there were always a few questions that he wasn't sure of. And he is so detail oriented about the things that he wants to talk about. He would say, "Oh, I might have to get back to you. Is it okay if I call you back?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, And then he would get back to me and fill me in and even go like another hour of talking. For whatever reason, he trusted me. And he didn't trust a lot of people, but I think he trusted me because we could talk music. I could talk his language. And during the course of those conversations, you end up talking about life and you talk about a bunch of other things as well in relationships. But, he was really proud of his work and wanted whatever information to be out there to be right. So he was this, he could be a little scary sometimes, but he was almost a perfect sort of interview subject. And I thought, okay, here's this great figure, 20th century, one of the biggest, selling, artists ever.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask questions and get the hell out of the way, because whatever he's going to say about this stuff is going to be infinitely more interesting than what I've got to say about it. And I didn't really care about my opinion when it came to that. Like, oh my God, I have this guy. It's like having, whatever it is, Miles or Beethoven or somebody talking to you. It's like, really? I'm going to inject my opinion into this. I have a little bit of an ego, but not that much, Yeah. And with Ed, it was the same way. Both Chris Gill and I had talked to Ed many, many times. It would be regularly once or twice a year and Ed was a shy person, but once you got to know him and warmed up, like he was great. He was very funny and interesting. And so that was another thing. Like, we're going to ask the questions, set it up, and then get the hell out of the way, because we had enough information. This Jeff Beck book is a little different.
Yeah.
It's a straight prose tried to make it super entertaining. I hope you found
It is. It's
Right.
amazing. Amazing stories.
But Jeff was not that kind of interview. In fact, you had to really sort of dig to get stuff. And sometimes he would just tell you stories just because he got sick of telling the other ones, and he would just make some new stuff up. I mean, which was also important for us to be the research, because for every story, there'd be three of them, three different versions. We have to find out which one is which.
Makes sense.
And his career was so complicated. I mean, with Ed, you have Van Halen, and it's a fairly linear career.
Yes.
With Jimmy, his major works were done with Led Zeppelin. You have a major. With Jeff, it's like, psh, psh, psh.
I know, it's everywhere.
So it just required us to fill in a lot of background information. Probably between Chris and I, we probably had about 30 hours of interviews with Jeff on tape.
Wow.
We talked to him a lot, but again, he wasn't into telling sort of stories in a linear kind of way. He wasn't into dissecting, his records in a way where it would completely stand up just to tell his story through just an interview. So there was that. We had to talk to other people and get information from a multiple different places.
I think you and Chris put it together brilliantly. It really informed me so much. As you were saying earlier, just putting it all together, piecing it together. And it's really, I think, the definitive book on Jeff, as far as I know, as far as my readings and research.
Well, it was important for us. And Chris and I realized that he's an important guy. There's a funny quote. Hang on, I have to get this out.
Oh, good. Thank you.
So Jeff said at one point, I was going to write an autobiography once. I started writing it, and then I thought, nah, let them dig around when I'm dead. So Chris and I took that as an order. But we wanted the book to be very accurate, historically accurate, and be sort of the definitive source for, if people had any questions about Jeff.
What is your relationship with Chris Gill? Did you guys work at Guitar World together?
Yeah, I was the editor in chief of Guitar World for 25 years. Wow. And Chris was one of the writers. And I just like working with people.
Yeah.
Like actually writing is pretty solitary.
Yeah.
And it's sort of nice to just bounce off of somebody else. And Chris has talents that I don't. Like I'm a good big picture kind of storyteller guy, and he's the fact checking guy. Like
oh, cool.
He really, he'll just kill me. He'll just say, yeah, where did you get that from? Or you idiot, this is completely wrong. This is what it is. And in fact, when they recently did the auction of Jeff's guitars.
Oh, yeah.
The auction house gave Chris the pamphlet that came with it.
Yep.
Proofread. And he found all kinds of mistakes. And he ended up writing like a foreword to that too. So, Chris is a really brilliant guitar guy, and just keeps me honest. And, we work well together, and it was totally fun. I was like, it was almost like a, sort of Christmas or something. It's sort of like, what do you want to write? Oh, I'll take this part. And I'm like, oh, I'll take this part, and then we I don't know. It just works. And it's more fun that way to have somebody challenge you a little bit. And, because I'll tell you guys, writing a book is no joke, man.
No joke, right?
Yeah. It's hard work and a lot of concentration. And people say, well, what do you do all day? And I'm like, put my butt in a chair for 8 hours and stare at a computer screen or talk to people or might make fun. It's real work. And especially if you want to make somebody's incredible music come alive, it's a huge responsibility as well.
And what an archive you have now, right? I imagine Chris does as well. It's just a huge archive of interviews with not only Jeff, but the guitar community for 25 years or maybe more. I don't know,
Yeah, I've talked to most of my heroes.
Who are some of the other ones you might want to mention?
People ask me like, who's one of your favorite interviews?
Oh yeah,
and I always say, I've talked to Eric Clapton a couple of times, and it was surprising. Like he was such a good dude.
Yeah.
Like talk about a guy that you could just, no canned answers, really coming from the heart, articulate, tell you a good story. I doesn't drink anymore, but he was definitely somebody I wouldn't mind having a beer with and, just hanging out with. So, so that was great. And I'm also, just recently, I worked on a project with the great guitar player, John McLaughlin. Now, he may not be as famous as some of these other people I've mentioned, the great jazz guitar player.
Love John.
But that was a lot of fun. We're working on a project. It's not a book like this. It's more of an art kind of book. But,
cool.
Spoke with John. I don't know, at this point I talked with so many,
sure.
So many of the greats.
I mean, you've been doing this for so long, and, I did some of this in college and after college, I'd write for the local rock magazines. I did some interviewing. Mm-hmm. What was it that made you interested in wanting to do this?
Well, it evolved. I would say first as a kid, as like a teenager, I just wanted to make a living doing something creative.
Love that.
To express myself. And, I played music. I play guitar, I play violin, I play other instruments. And I was pretty good, definitely played in some solid bands throughout my life. And I grew up in Detroit and I moved to New York. And so then it was, how do I survive in this place? And I got an early job writing for a magazine called Music, Computers, and Software magazine.
Oh, I remember that magazine.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was one of the first sort of magazines that focused on using computers. And I was very ahead of the curve on a lot of that stuff. So that just ended up getting more attention. I ended up getting more gigs and, making money, and people like what I wrote, and so that one thing led to another, and I became the editor of Guitar World somehow, which I thank my lucky stars. And it's interesting because I did interview Johnny Depp for this book, and who's great, by the way, very cool. And Johnny, most people don't know this, but he started out as a rock musician, as a guitar player. He had bands in Florida. He moved to LA. And it was all sort of by luck that he ended up auditioning. And he said, when he got the job on 21 Jump Street, he had to decide whether it was going to be like this or that, And I still think he still thinks of himself more as a musician.
I think that's right. Yeah.
And I think I still do, even though I've made my living as a writer, I still think of myself as a musician. It's sort of something that doesn't, leave you. But again, all that said, it was just whatever was going to click first. I wanted to do something creative. And every day I thank my lucky stars that I've been able to sort of live by my wits writing and, about things that I love. And, it's a cool thing.
It is a cool thing. Are you still playing guitar?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Got one about a foot away from me here.
Really close by. Well done.
Yeah. Yeah. Not as good as Jeff Beck though.
Well, no one's as good as Jeff Beck. There's only one.
Yeah.
I think we covered most of the questions that I wanted to ask you. But to finalize, in this world that we're in now, if we want to go there, what's your advice for creatives in general? Creatives being writers, musicians, artists.
I think you have to be thoughtful about it in a weird way. I mean, we got in a little discussion about AI and how that's transforming the world. And we talked a little bit about Substack and how that is transforming, some of the writing world. And if I was a young guy just starting out today, I would really study all of that stuff and say, how can I make my creativity work within this context? Mm-hmm. Because it's not going to go away. Mm-hmm. And what I've done might be a bit of a relic of a dying age. Not doing interviews and thinking about music and writing about it, but the medium, magazines, books, and so you have to really look at what you want to do, and you have to look at the context of it. I think what you're doing is probably more relevant than what I'm doing. They should take their cues from you, have a great show, do thoughtful interviews online, network that with a Substack post if you want to write more, all these things. But it is wonderful because back when I was a kid, you had to get hooked up with some corporation or some big publisher.
Yeah.
And you had to have ink and put it on paper and get it on a truck and send it to Washington or whatever it is that you were doing. Like, it was much more difficult back then. Yeah, the chances that I would be the editor of Guitar World were probably 1 in gazillion, because there was only a little small handful of those kind of jobs.
Yeah. Right place, right time, and ready to go.
Yeah. Lucky.
Wow.
But you can make your own sort of luck up here if you're talented. The levers of distribution are in the hands of the people.
Yeah, it's also that's true. Also saturation, though. Since everyone is online. So it's interesting how we snake through and get some visibility. Because everybody's there. But these are just some of the challenges and opportunities of now.
Yeah, for sure it is. But I do think that it gets romantic. The old days also gets romanticized, a little too much. I think, some of the things that we can do today are just incredible,
Absolutely. Yeah.
And oh my God, I mean, trying to research a book is so much easier. I mean, you don't want to trust everything that's online, but you had to, back in the old days, go to a library or something.
That's right.
Through microfiche, and you people won't even know what I'm talking about.
You can stay home.
Yeah. So anyways, if you're smart and you're creative, and you can entertain, people hold their attention, you'll figure it out.
Yeah. We continue. Well, Brad, it was great to hang.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of fun.
And love the book. And I highly recommend it to all the Jeff Beck aficionados out there to dive in and grab your book. And hope we can hang soon. Maybe July 14th, I will see you.
I would love to have you out.
Yeah.
And I would say, even if you aren't a huge Jeff Beck fan, if you really want to know where Jimmy Page and Eric Clapton came from, that's also in this book. And a lot of great, rock and roll stories going from the 60s all the way into the 2000s.
Oh, it's like a history of British guitar, really, right?
Yeah,
A big chunk of it.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, Brad. Great to meet you.
Well, thank you. The show's really cool, and I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. Tim Motzer for Searching for Sparks. For Brad, see you later.